Hello and good day, everyone. This is Jason Straight with the Cloud Pass Virtual Group. Our presentation today is Introduction to Azure Data Studio, and our presenter is Eric Flamm. Before we get going with the presentation, I just have a few announcements that I want to go over. First, this virtual group is brought to you by Microsoft Azure. Microsoft Azure helps to support this virtual group to make sure that we can continue to provide cloud data platform presentations. And so if you haven't yet started looking at migrating to the cloud, we do recommend that you take a look at Microsoft Azure. If you are not yet a member of our virtual group, please check us out at cloud.pass.org. Out there you can log in to become a subscriber, and when you do that, you'll start receiving our newsletter, which comes out every week to week and a half and lets you know about all upcoming presentations. In regards to upcoming presentations, there's still 6 more on the calendar. One more for this week and another for the upcoming weeks. Always an opportunity for folks to go out there and learn about building out data platforms. So check out the upcoming schedule. If you are interested in presenting, we're always looking for new presenters, so you can reach out to us at cloud@pass.org to become a presenter. Alternatively, you can go to our forum and fill out the call for presenters link. If you have not registered and are planning to attend either in both physically or virtual, depending upon how they do the Pass Summit this fall, you can get a $150 discount on your registration by using the discount code there on the screen, that VGDISFKDQ. This virtual group is part of a number of virtual groups that Pass helps to support. These focus on different areas such as global Chinese and women in technology, or professional development and business intelligence. There's lots of different topics out there that they focus on and lots of opportunity for continued learning. Throughout the session, I expect some of you may have some questions, and if you do, please type them into the question panel. And then at the end of the session, I'll go over those questions with Eric, time permitting. And with that, those are my announcements before we start here today. So our presentation again is Introduction to Azure Data Studio with Eric Flamm. Eric, let me make you the presenter again. I'll try this again, make presenter, there we go.
Hey, tell me if I'm sharing the right screen.
You are sharing the right screen, it looks great.
Otherwise you get a lot of feedback of me looking at me looking at me. Good afternoon, right, or good morning or good evening. I know that this airs virtually, as many of us are getting familiar with here. So again, I'm Eric Flamm. We're going to talk about Azure Data Studio. This is very much introductory. This product has been out for going on 2 years now. There was a previous version called SQL Operations Studio. And so it's been around for a bit. It's a very extensible product, so it's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. So this is in no way meant to be a comprehensive review of Azure Data Studio. Hopefully we'll get you guys started. If you've never used Azure Data Studio before, you should get enough information to get started with it. If you've used it, hopefully you'll pick up something from my talk, or connect with me and we can chat about what you're working on. Let's see. And I should say I am, this is my first presentation on GoToWebinar. I've shared my screen on a number of other platforms before, so hopefully this will work out well. The presentation's on my left-hand screen, so if I look over there, I'm not talking to my cat. It's actually the screen over there. So this is about my bio. I'm basically an independent business intelligence consultant. As of the past conference last year, I guess I'm now considered a data engineer, because a lot of what I do for my clients is wrangling data, getting it cleaned up and organized so that it can be used in decision making by my clients. So a lot of the cool whiz-bang stuff in like Power BI and Tableau depends on good data, and a lot of what I do is making data at least better than we found it. I've got some background in Microsoft SQL Server going back quite a ways, certified on 2012 and haven't bothered to update it since then. I've been a presenter in a number of different live conferences. So now I'm trying my hand at virtual presenting. I'm an active volunteer with the local database, local past user group. We've been putting on a very large SQL Saturday. Up until this year, we had to cancel every year for the last 10 years. And my contact info is accurate and on the screen. We'll be sharing the deck with Jason, so it'll be available down the road, but feel free to contact me on any of those channels. And I am on LinkedIn. Feel free, it's Eric Flamm. You should be able to find me there. So here's the agenda for today. Roughly speaking, we're going to talk briefly about what is Azure Data Studio, talk about downloading and installing Azure Data Studio, talk about Azure Data Studio and SSMS for those of you who are, SQL Server DBAs or SQL Server professionals. You're familiar with SQL Server Management Studio. Azure Data Studio is not a replacement or an alternative in a lot of ways to SSMS. I'll get into that, but I didn't want to use versus because they're not exclusive. You can have both of them, and many data professionals will use both tools. I'll talk about the interface, so basically what you're going to see on the screen. Hopefully I'll get to the demos pretty quickly and we can start actually using the product. We'll have some time for Q&A. And I've got a screen of resources, which I hopefully will be updating before I share the deck with Jason. These first couple slides are pretty much stolen directly from Microsoft's website. So I'll get that link is in the resources page. Basically, Azure Data Studio is a fork of Visual Studio Code. When I say it's a fork, in control speak, there are forks and there are branches. Branches are versions of the code which are intended to be reintegrated with the master branch. So if you're working on a feature, you work on a branch and then you bring it back into the master code. So the Visual Studio Code has a number of branches where the Microsoft folks and other folks are working on changes to Visual Studio Code. Whereas Azure Data Studio is a fork, meaning that at one point they copied the code from Visual Studio Code, and then they made changes to it and added features to it. As Visual Studio Code evolves, some of those features are being moved over into Azure Data Studio. The other way isn't working quite so much. Basically, stuff you see in Azure Data Studio may not be available in Visual Studio Code and may never be available in Visual Studio Code. So they are two separate software products at this point. The latest release is 1.18.1. That was released 6 days ago. It was a hot fix for 1.18.0. It was just a few corrections, I gather. I haven't actually dug into the detail on. Normally they release in the middle to the second or third week of every month. So there's a new version of Azure Data Studio every month. The last one was released 1.18.0 on May 20th. There are extensive release notes that are available both through the product and online, and do advise you to take a look at those if you are updating Azure Data Studio. Generally, they don't break old stuff, they just put in new stuff, lots of new stuff. It's cross-platform. It runs on Windows, Linux, and Mac. Unfortunately, I can't connect my Mac upstairs for some reason, so I'm only going to show you Windows today, but trust me, that runs on all of them. And I will show you the download links for all the platforms. You can connect to more than just SQL Server, which is not something that SSMS does really well. One of the targets of, well, it's an extension actually, in Azure Data Studio is Postgres, which is used very commonly in a lot of embedded applications or proprietary applications where it's the relational database for the application. And if you want to go after a Postgres database, the available tools for Postgres, the proprietary tools, are pretty bad. It's really hard to get used to using them. Azure Data Studio is a lot easier, a lot more effective at connecting to a Postgres database and doing simple queries against it, or extracting data that you can then load into another application. Jupyter Notebooks are now part of Azure Data Studio. This is not something that Visual Studio Code has adopted. For those of you who are not familiar with the data science world, I've got a little video, Vicky Harp introducing notebooks, and after that I'll show you a little bit about them. They're a fun interface I don't really know that DBAs are going to find a lot of use. I do have one good use case for them. Plus, you have customizable code snippets, and you have server and data dashboard. So that's pretty much what the studio, what the product is. Again, this is I've given you the link here, docs.microsoft.com, Azure Data Studio, or you can just Google or Bing Azure Data Studio, and you'll find the download page. You can see these are the available download links right now. So for Windows, basically the user installer. If you're a systems administrator, you might want to get the system installer because you can put that onto a server and then allow, give access to the people who need to install the product on their desktops. For Mac, it's simply a zip file that you then unzip and drag into your applications folder. Linux, each Linux family has its own installer. So there's a Debian, an RPM, and a tar. If you're not familiar with Linux installs, there actually is a walkthrough on this web page for how to download and install the product on each variant of Linux. The other thing that you're going to end up doing very quickly when you install Azure Data Studio is installing extensions. They basically add functionality based on your use case. It's one of the great things about Azure Data Studio is it's extensible. So Microsoft has written a number of extensions. People who are associated with Microsoft, contractors and consultants, have written extensions for Microsoft for Azure Data Studio. And your random third party has written a lot of extensions for Azure Data Studio. Now, I would be cautious about installing random third party extensions without validating the code, or at least finding somebody who's actually installed it and not had issues, because at least in the early days of the product, some of the extensions caused some instability in the product. So they're easy enough to uninstall, and I'm not aware of any malware type vectors on extensions, but that doesn't mean there aren't some, because people do that stuff. All right. So here's the slide again, copied directly from the Microsoft website on Azure Data Studio and SSMS. This was actually, I think, I want to say Buck Woody wrote it our blog post a couple years ago. These are basically, actually, it might have been one of the other database guys, database content creators. But basically, if you need to run on macOS or Linux, SSMS doesn't run there. Now, you can obviously run it in a Windows, sub and VM on macOS or Linux, or in like a Docker container, but that's a little more complex infrastructure than simply installing an open source piece of software. If you want to connect the big data cluster on SQL Server 2019, apparently that's not supported in SSMS, or at least that's the implication of why you should use Azure Data Studio. If you just basically write a lot of T-SQL queries, which is most of what I've done in my career, although I have spent some time as a DBA or accidental DBA, it's really fast and easy to use and organize queries in Azure Data Studio, and I think it's a little more user-friendly than SSMS. You've got an integrated terminal, which makes it really easy to jump into PowerShell or a command line. If you use the wizards a lot, you probably want to stick with SSMS because there aren't a lot of wizards, but there is Intellisense. So if you like Intellisense, you can get that in Azure Data Studio. And as I mentioned, PostgreSQL is not something you're going to get to with SSMS. Again, SSMS, great for administration. It gives you access to the query store. Import, export of DAC packs. I think that's how you get from SQL Server on-prem to Azure, if I'm not mistaken. So that's a good use case for SSMS. And some of the other administrative features of SSMS are not available in Data Studio. Although there is a central server administration extension for Data Studio, which brings some of those administrative features into Data Studio. The Data Studio interface. And by the way, I am going quickly through these first slides, both because you can get them from the Microsoft website and because we want to get to the demos, right? That's what this is all about. You guys want to see what this thing can do. The structure of Azure Data Studio is very similar to Visual Studio Code, if you're familiar with that. It is different from SSMS. There's a couple of user interface pieces that I've called out here on this slide. the sidebar, which is actually not just the icons, but the gray menu area. I don't know if I've got a pointer here. Let's see. Give me a, let's see, laser pointer. Perfect. So this area up here is the sidebar, but so is this gray area, the fly out from the sidebar. You've got a settings and update gear icon, which you will use quite a bit when you're using, because of the frequency of updates, and also because that's where you get to your settings. It's a canvas, and you'll notice I mentioned it's a tab canvas. You'll notice that up here I actually have 3 separate tabs open, just like Microsoft Edge or Google Chrome. You can now have way more things open at a time than you can possibly keep track of. There's also an integrated terminal, which also provides, text output from build session, build activity, and so forth down here. There's another flyout that'll come out from the right, like a connection value. We'll see that in the demos. Couldn't quite figure out how to get that onto the screen for showing you what the UI looked like. But the sidebar is really kind of that's kind of the home of all the features. So what I've done is, let's see, I guess I got to right click here and get next. What I've done is I've called out the sidebar. So on the standard sidebar, and this sidebar changes from time to time. So it could change next issue to next release if that's what they decide to do. On the sidebar, the top icon, which looks like a server, I guess, is for your connections. And this would include connections to on-premise servers. So I have a local SQL Server that I can connect to. It would include connections to Azure, both servers and databases on Azure, as well as VMs and the SQL, the big SQL instance that you can get, which I'm fascinated by, but it's way too expensive for my account. Managed instance on SQL Server. All of those are available through the connections screen, and we'll see how to add connections during the demos. There's a search and replace feature, which I haven't really focused on. It allows you to, it's a fairly new feature, allows you to search through individual files in the workspace, as well as folder names and file names. And there is a replace feature as well. I'd be really careful about that because you could pretty much easily end up refactoring all your code when you didn't mean to. The notebooks node allows you to view all of the notebooks in the current folder and subfolders, or the current workspace. Workspaces are like virtual folders. We'll see those in the demo. Explorer is a file. First of all, it shows you all of your open tabs and which ones need to be saved, which ones have unsaved changes, as well as a file tree of all the files and folders in your current workspace. Source control is for accessing things like Git or other providers. There's icons for the main commands like commit and pull and push and all that. I'll show you that briefly. Right now, I'm not source controlling anything, but we can put something in a new repo if we want to. And then the extensions list shows you the installed extensions, including those which need to be updated. Extensions run on a different update cycle than the main product. So the product is on about a monthly update cycle. Some extensions haven't been updated for a while. Others get updated, when the developers feel like updating them. So be aware that your extensions may need updating and reinstallation at a different cycle than Azure Data Studio. It'll alert you and help you, walk you through the updates. I'm sure I have some out-of-date extensions, so we'll get a chance to work those in the demos. And then, as I mentioned, at the bottom left of the screen, there's a settings gear icon, which will give you quick access to application settings, features, themes, updates, that kind of stuff. Oh, let's see, right-click next. There we go. This is a quick video. It's about a 4.5-minute video. It's a little old now, but it does a good job of introducing notebooks in SQL. I guess let me see if I can turn off my laser pointer here. Come on, video, start. Nope, didn't want to do that. Let's see. You would think that just clicking that button again would turn off the laser pointer. There we go.
Hi, I'm Vicki Harp. I'm with the SQL Server product team. I'm here today to show you notebooks in Azure Data Studio. So notebooks are a concept in data science, which has been used to do a lot of data visualization, data exploration, and data work, primarily in the Python language. And when people are talking about notebooks, a lot of times they're talking about Jupyter Notebooks. So the implementation of notebooks that we have in Azure Data Studio is a Jupyter Notebook with a custom front end that's better tailored to fit within the Azure Data Studio experience. So first, I'm going to show you a simple Python notebook. This is a notebook that has Python language, and you can see we've got a section up here which is human readable text, and a section down here that has code. So if I hit run on this, this particular code calls out to the internet and pulls down a random photograph of a dog. To show you around the notebook experience, we have a picker here where you choose the language. So in this case, I'm running Python 3, and I'm running it on my local machine. I could instead move over to the language SQL and then pick which of my SQL Server machines that I want to attach to. I've got my SQL servers listed here. So to take it a little bit further, I'll show you an example of how you might use this. So here I've got a SQL Server 2019 Big Data Cluster, which is SQL Server running in Kubernetes with both SQL and Spark. So here in my HDFS section, I've got this directory full of CSV files. And if I take a look at that, preview it, you can see that it's a lot of information about dog license information. So this is actually the data dump of the Allegheny County, Pennsylvania dog licenses for the last several years. So using the Spark language in connecting to Python using Spark on the SQL Server Big Data Cluster, I'm able to run code to read those files directly out of CSV. And then I can do some analysis. So in this case, I'm going to count of the rows. I'm going to list the distinct list of just the names. So we have 25,000 names. And then I'm going to pull a random name out of that hat. We have a name here. Now, if I was using a Spark, if I was very used to using Python, that would be great. But if I'm more of a SQL person, then maybe I want to connect to that same data set, lab cluster, using the SQL language. Here I've created a external table over that file format. This is something that you can do using a wizard. Here, an external table from CSV files, and then that would create this external table that I'm using. But in this case, I've done it using code. And if I hit run cells, you can see that I'm also using SQL to access the same data that I just accessed using Spark. Now these files are saved as IPYNB files, which I can then share with my colleagues, and I can run again. So in the case that I wanted to run this today, send it over to my colleague, they could open it on their instance and attach it to their own cluster or to my same cluster and run it again. We're also using notebooks in a few other ways. Here we have something called Jupyter Books, and this is a list of basically notebooks that have been compiled together into a sort of chapter page format. So here we have a SQL Server ML Services course, which is shown through notebooks. So we've got all of the documentation present, we've got the code samples here, and then you can, at the end of each chapter, either hit the next button to go to the next one, or use this chapter browser to pick it. We've also got the supportability book for SQL Server 2019 Big Data Clusters. If I brought up the command palette and pick this Jupyter Books 2019 guide, that's what I used to open this up. And here we have all of the information that you might need in order to support your new big data cluster, a lot of the Kubernetes commands, the cluster information. And this is something that you can run, you can send to someone else, and you can save, do what you want with. So we are very excited about notebooks in Azure Data Studio. We really think that this is something that will be very useful to our community. We're really interested in finding out how you're using it and what you want from it. So if you are interested in learning more, go to GitHub, look for Azure Data Studio, and you can open up feature requests, enter bugs, and that's also where you can download both the stable and the Insiders Edition. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, so that, I thought that was as compact an introduction to notebooks as I could find, and when you see the interface, you'll see that the interface has changed a bit, and we'll go from there. All right, I'm going to switch applications here to, let's see, I wonder if I can zoom this in. I'm sure I can. Let's see. Should be a keyboard shortcut for that, shouldn't there? Ah, there it is, control equals. All right, that's all I needed. All right, that's a little better, I hope. Hopefully everybody can see my Data Studio on the screen here. As I said, I've got 3 tabs. Interesting. That I'm not quite sure why they're doubling up on me here. Close those down. Got there. All right. Got 1 tab open on my screen right now, but I want to walk through the sidebar with you. I'm watching my time here. So as I said, the first element of the sidebar is the connection screen. Now this is going to be familiar to you in one way or another with SSMS or some such. Let me close down, mess around there. So this is my local SQL Server running on a separate box from the desktop I'm presenting on. And you can see that, you know, I'm running SA. Don't yell at me. The password is not blank. It is fixed, but it's not blank. I've got a number of demonstration databases as well as some demo activity databases with some of my clients on here, and so forth. I also have connections to a number of remote databases. I don't believe any of these connections are live right now. Well, this one should be. I should be able to connect to this. Let's see. Yeah. All right. So if I the way I do that, let me just show you that. If I want to add a connection, I click on the Add Connection icon, and it opens up a connection screen asking you for the typical details that you might have to enter for a you know, a SQL Server. So in this case, you know, I would type in my server name, my authentication information, and interesting things down here. Obviously, I can pick my let's see. I've already got a connection there, but that's okay. That's right. All right. As soon as I put in my connection information, it goes to the server, retrieves information about the databases out there, so I can set the default database for this connection. For example, AdventureWorks 2012. And one of the things that you can do in Data Studio is group your servers into ad hoc grouping. So if I add a new group, I can call it the demo group, and I can say this is a demo for Cloud VC, and then I can give it a group color, hopefully one different from one I've already used. And when I say, then you can give it a name. So I can just call this, you know, we'll just call this AdventureWorks. How about that? And I'll hit connect. And so now I have a couple of things. First of all, I have a group somewhere. Well, apparently my group name just got shortened to demo. Okay, I have a group server, a connection group called demo. In that I have a single connection called AdventureWorks. And in that, it's going directly to my default database and showing me the usual nodes, you know, the usual tree for my database objects. So now the other thing is that you'll notice that in the main canvas, when I click on a database, there we go. Come on. Didn't mean to close that. I got that. It actually shows me a database management screen. This shows me some information about my recovery, you know, my database settings. Let me move my palette out of the way here. It'll show me, you know, stuff I can search on, different tables, different objects within the database. Now, if I go up and I click on a server, for example, Windows 2016, that node within my servers collection, I should get a different screen. So this is the server management screen. So this shows me what version of Windows of SQL Server I'm running. It shows me the OS version of the server. Let's see, last time I ran a backup, I guess I'm a little overdue, and my database size of the various database files stored on that server. So this is kind of a basic perspective that you might use as a DBA to get a quick view of your server status, make sure none of your databases are running away. It's a little out of scope for today because there is a quick start for customizing these displays. So that this is obviously just a database query against the master database model. Yeah, against the master database to get the database sizes. The underlying code, the underlying query is stored in the settings file, and you can change that and create new new objects for the dashboard that appear for a server or appear for a database. So that is the database management node. Obviously, I can also start a new query. Now, if I do a new query against the database, it's going to default to the master. Let's go back to AdventureWorks 2012, and just to show the typical simple, select top 10 from, I don't know, person.person, run. Oh, sorry, top 10 star. There we go. All right, so that's a typical, typical T-SQL query experience. Let me see if we have some quantitative data here. Not really. Let's see. Usually I have a better, where is the, sorry, didn't work through my data, let's do this. Tables. Let's do HR employee, that's probably a better one anyway. You'll notice the Intellisense coming into play as well. It's very responsive. Hoping I can get there, vacation hours. So if instead of top 10 star, if I say top 10 vacation hours from human resources, let's see, and I also want the employee ID, which I believe is just ID, business entity ID. So let's do that. Business entity ID. There we go. Let's run that. So by business entity ID, this should be the, doesn't really look like the top 10 vacation hours. I guess it's selected. I haven't done a lot of querying against this database recently. Let's try that. Okay, it didn't really do a top 10. But that said, if you look over here on the output pane, one of the output options I have is a chart. And what this is going to show me is the chart, and obviously it's customizable. Let's see, it is a bar chart, that's fine. There we go. Okay, so by employee, let me get rid of this thing here. There we go. By employee, how many hours of vacation do each of my top 10 employees have? And not necessarily the most useful chart, but definitely a demonstration that we can quickly visualize numeric data as well as geographic data. There's a number of chart types here, including time series table. Well, do it's a table. We just saw that. Okay, I thought there used to be a mapping feature on here, but apparently not. Let's try messages, results. There's a visualizer, which brings me into Sandance. Yeah. All right. This is an extension which I'll be happy to demonstrate or explain to you at some point. So that's quick. That's a quick and dirty how to do a query. What I also want to share with you, and I mentioned this as a feature, is snippets. Okay, a UI feature. Let me jump back here. Of Azure Data Studio is the command palette. I used this a little earlier to find zoom in. There's an extensive palette, so you generally are going to want to search in the search bar here. So in this case, I'm going to type in SQL, and when I type in SQL, you can see that I get a number of command options, including. Wait a minute, that's interesting. I would have expected a few more how to make a connection to. I guess because I'm already connected. Not seeing that. That's interesting. Let me. I don't add a new connection. Oh, yay. What happened? Did I just close Data Studio? Probably. Bear with me. Coming back. One of the nice things about Azure Data Studio is when you accidentally close it, it opens up to where you left it. So what I'm trying to, well, yeah, okay, so enough of that. One of the things that I have done within, am I connected over here still? Yeah. One of the things that I have done is built I'll make sure I still got it. Come on. Yeah, okay. I've built a snippet. I actually built 2 snippets of code. One to do, and you can see them on the top here. Well, yeah, there we go. Select limit 10. And you can see that the code that it does is select top 10 star from schema name.table name. Now, oh, that's right, that's the wrong one. Select limit 10. Yeah, cancel. Sorry. Try that again. Command. So all I do in the SQL palette is type in SQL. Okay, select limit 10. Select star from schema name.table name limit 10. Now, for those of you who do T-SQL code, you'll notice that is not normal T-SQL code. In fact, this is PostgreSQL. So if I were connected to a Postgres database, as I mentioned, I'm not currently connected to one, I would want to use this snippet in order to get the top 10 items. Alternatively, since we are connected to a SQL Server database, which is, we were connected, we're not now. To AdventureWorks. Really? There we go. Okay. And I have this variable here of schema name.table name. Again, I can do person.person and hit run. And that's exactly the query I had before, but I had the snippet put together. Now, in order to show you those snippets, what I want to do is go up here and type in snippet. And I have a preference for configuring user snippets. I jumped through that too quickly, didn't I? Sorry. Again, view, command palette, preference. Okay. There are snippets files for any number of activities that you might do in the canvas. So you can see that there's a set of PowerShell snippets, Python snippets, which are primarily used in notebooks. There's some XML snippets, and I created a snippet file called SQL.json. And when you look at that file, again, this is just a text file. Basically, it's a standard format of you create a name, basically a description of the snippet. You have the prefix, which is what you key, which Intellisense reads. So when you type in SQL, it looks for all the snippets and all the files that start with SQL. The body, which is basically what you're going to insert into the code, and the description, which is, again, just the human readable description. So you can see that I have 2, select top 10 rows and limit 10 rows, with one being in the SQL format and one being in the Postgres format. So you can see that if you run the same style of query frequently, one of the use cases for this sort of thing is if you do a lot of, you come in as a consultant, you often come into a SQL Server environment where you have to evaluate, basically the whole database. And one thing you could do, you might want to do a row count, or maybe you have a standard query against the master database or the model, well, not model data, against the master database to get specific information. Maybe you implement some of the, some of the built-in system queries that you want to do over and over and over again. You could have snippets to do that. Probably easier to do that in a notebook for whatever that's worth. But again, if you're more comfortable in the T-SQL environment, this is a really quick way to get some pro forma T-SQL, very similar to what you have in SSMS, by the way. So that is the snippet process. You'll notice that these two queries, that query being not even a query. I'm not quite sure what's going on with Data Studio that it's showing me two variants of the same tab, and then it closed it. Huh. That's a weird behavior. I don't know if my recent update changed something, but all right, sorry about that. Let's go back here and just say we're going to do the query. There we go. And we'll just do SQL, select top 10 from person to person. So let people who type during demos. Okay, so that works. You'll know what I was going to point out was in the tabbed environment, you'll see that there is a dot on the tab rather than an X. If we go over to the Explorer, up in the top, it notes the open editors. It says there's an open editor on something called laptop query 1.SQL and an open editor for SQL query 1, which is one we're just creating. That one is indicated as being unsaved. So if I come up here to the save button, I will hit save all, and it's going to prompt me, hey, SQL query 1 is a generic name, and it wants me to save it as, so I'm just going to call this the VC demo 1, and hit save. And there we go. Now the name has changed to VC demo 1. So that is, again, I'm just saved I just saved a query, and you'll notice that now it has an X. I can close it without losing any of my work. All right, let's close these down because we don't really know what's going on, why these keep popping up. I may have some, like I say, I may have some stuff left over that needs to be cleaned up. All right, why won't that close? Huh. All right, bear with me. All right, so we've talked about a little bit about basically the canvas for T-SQL, and Vicki presented the notebook canvas. Want to show this. These are all the notebooks that are in the current workspace, and let me talk about a workspace before I jump into that. When you open this up originally, I actually have a workspace. Let me close this. Oh. File, close workspace. Get back to a clean screen, maybe that'll help. All right, so this is the welcome screen for Data Studio. This is what you should see when you open up, and you should see some. Oh, look, there's that video. All right, this is a new screen, by the way. I just updated to the 1.18.1 this morning. Probably not a good idea before my network. If I go down here, I can open a folder on my file tree, just like you would anywhere else. And I have a folder called ADS for Azure Data Studio Demo. And if I open that up, double clicking it, if I just say select folder, and then I go to the file tree, the Explorer, what I'll see is this is just a folder view of the folder I just opened. But the alert down here says you have several workspace files in this in this folder. So a workspace is it's this code-workspace file. Basically, it's a virtual folder. So it includes files that may exist in multiple folders across your computer. I suspect even across the cloud, although I have not tried this with any kind of a remote repository. So you have to think about that. But so if let's just say you have multiple developers or multiple analysts working on a data science experiment, you might want to have them each working in a separate folder, but you might want to have a workspace to bring their work together when you're, when you're presenting or something. So I can actually just double click on one of these workspace files, and now I've got it's saying, hey, you want to open your workspace? And I'll say, sure. And it's going to come back with, looks like the workspace and the folder are pretty much look pretty similar to me. But like I say, you can have workspaces which are a virtual folder, and what it allows you to do is basically remove objects from the workspace. Should have a delete. I think I'll delete that. I deleted it. No, I'll have to work through with normally the workspace allows you to remove. You can add and remove other files to the workspace and resave the workspace and have more files open that way. Interesting. All right, so we've talked a little bit about, let me go over here to my notebook here. Okay, so if you want to, let's see, this is connecting to, this one, okay. In order to see what this looks like, if I click in here on the tab, come on, I want to edit this. What I wanted to show you was I'm not on my laptop anyway. There we go. This may work. Let's see. Kernel. Okay, let's talk through quickly talk through some of the options that Vicki was showing on her demo. The kernel. One of the things that's been added to the kernel in the last about 5 months at this point is PowerShell. So you can actually run you can create a notebook of PowerShell PowerShell commands. I'm not going to go into that right now, but just be aware that if you do a lot of PowerShell, this is very powerful because it can save. And I'm going to do a new notebook because I'm not sure that this notebook's working. You can save your code and your results in the same notebook. So let's do this. Let's go up to my connections. We know this connection is working. And let's do a new notebook on that connection. All right, so we're attached to that default connection. I'm a little surprised that this is being as difficult as it is. Okay, there we go. If I want to add text, what I wanted to show you here was that we have a kind of a simplistic text editor here, which allows you to do things like, this is bold text, and you can highlight it and do bold. What it's doing, this was added, I want to say 2 months ago. What the icons here do they are applying Markdown, which is a very simplified text markup activity. So you can get clean looking text that way. You can do bold, italics, underlines, highlighted, and when we go here, when we click out of here, let's go ahead and add some code now. You'll notice that the text is now just documenting the work. So if the code is, we'll go down here and do our quick top 10 over here, from person to person. Sure, I'm connected. We'll find out. And I run the code, invalid object. Yeah. Change the connection to one of the connections that we already have. Adventure works. There it is. That's because I forgot to, I didn't memorize the password in the thing. There we go. All right, if we hit execute, there we go. All right, so you'll notice that my code is in this notebook and my results are in the notebook, but I can clear the results and now I just have my code. So if I now add another code cell, select count star from person.person, I can run this code against that connection, and it tells me there are 19,000, right? Or I can clear all my results, and then if I say run cells, now it runs the first run and it runs the second one. So you can see how between clearing the results and saving the data here, and we haven't saved the notebook, so we'll go back over here to here and click on Save All. And that will, it's going to again ask me where to save this. Call this VC Notebook. Now I can take this IPYNB file and give it to somebody else, or take it with me on a thumb drive, go to a new client, sit down with them and say, okay, let's connect to your customer service database, and we'll, by the way, they won't have my snippets unless I take that snippet file with me as well. But I can do select count star from, whatever tables they have, and quickly find table lengths and get sample data and so forth. And of course, I can access the master data as well. So that's kind of the basic use case for notebooks. I do encourage you to take a look at PowerShell in notebooks, because if you do a lot of PowerShell, notebooks are very powerful, as you can see. I'll make sure I've kind of touched on everything and give you guys a chance for Q&A. Oh, I did want to touch here, Git. Well, source control. Many people don't use Git, although it's kind of become a little universal. For those of you who aren't familiar with Git, it does create a local repository on your computer, which is basically a copy of all your files and a copy of the recent changes to your files. So you'll notice that it's keeping track of both my SQL file and my Python file, and I can just type in a message here and call this my initial commit, and go ahead and hit the check mark. And I want to stage everything. All right, it's now going to create, and we'd have to go look at my repo, but it's now created a repository that I can use using Git commands to track down when I made changes to my code, what changes I made, and to revert back to a previous version if I find that I've changed something that I didn't mean to change. Basic source control activity. You can, in turn, take you can push the local Git repository. This ... menu is incredibly full. You can push it out or sync it to a remote repository, so that if your laptop gets burned up and you want to retrieve your data, your code, it's safely stored in the cloud somewhere. Lots of stuff on Git. I'm not a Git expert, so I'm not going to go too much more into that. Extensions. As I mentioned, there are extensions that have been installed, some of which may need to be refreshed. And if they are, they will tell you down here, they will tell you that this extension needs to be refreshed. And they also provide a extensive list. I think there's about 50 recommended extensions. I don't recommend installing every extension that's available, because it will slow down your machine as well as confusing your menus. Pick the ones you need and try it, or you want to try, and go from there. As I said, the settings button down here allows you to check for updates, and it will alert you for updates. You can change the theme, you can see the keyboard shortcuts and all that good stuff. So lots of stuff on the settings menu. Also gives you quick access to that command panel that I talked about. So with that, let me jump back to the PowerPoint. Not that there's anything much in there. Q&A we'll get to in just a sec. I do want to mention I have a resources tab. I'm going to do some updates on this because I realize that these are a little out of date at this point. Well, the home page hasn't changed, but everything else has changed. So let me update these before I send the file back to Jason. Jason, are there questions?
Hi, yeah, we've got at least one question in here. And then anyone else, if you do have some questions, now's a great time to get those in. And so the first question we have is, does Azure Data Studio, does it have an inline T-SQL debugger? This was previously removed from SSMS in V18.
Debugger, good question. Let's see. Let's see if there's anything here. No command for debugging. So a simple answer would be, I don't think so, but we can look in the extensions. Maybe there's a SQL debug. No, let's see. T-SQL for SQL formatter. That doesn't sound like a terribly usable function, but okay. Yeah, I don't believe there is. I haven't run into that. Now there is on the, so this is an open source project, which means that the actual, sorry about that. The actual code for Azure Data Studio is entirely available through GitHub, through their homepage on their repository on GitHub. On GitHub is also a list of all the issues which they are addressing and the timeline for which they're going to address them in. And I believe there's a feature request. You can put in a request as an issue for a specific feature. I believe there's on the forum somewhere there's a user voice kind of thing where you can upvote specific features. I'd have to search the blogs to figure out where exactly that is. But so at this point, I don't believe there's a debugger for T-SQL on. Let's just take a quick look at something.
Okay.
Do an explain here. Does that help? Let's see. Oh, well, that's a bad query. Let's do person to person. I'm just curious what the explain button does. I've learned a lot about this by exploring. Okay, yeah, that just shows the query plan. So I don't see a debug no access, right. But something that's certainly something that you could put out there on GitHub and get a response from the team on.
Right. And then the next question is can you get an execution plan, which you actually got one right there.
I got one there just by accident. No. It doesn't, right. It's not there by default, but yeah, it's available.
All right. And then let's see here. Is this suitable for both developers and admins?
I would say definitely yes. The target audience is certainly a blend. I think one of the features for admins, first of all, I think notebooks have great potential for admins for repetitive, parameterized type, inquiries, investigation type work. There are some sort of archetypal SQL investigation tools. I think Glenn Berry has a kind of a famous blog post on, if your SQL Server performance is diminishing, here's the sequence of queries to go through. That would make a great notebook where you could basically connect the notebook to the SQL database you were having issues with, or the server you were having issues with, and run his queries against your server, and store the results, and obviously save that notebook for documentation. And for that matter, you could do a baseline, and then if performance appeared to be diminishing, you could run the queries again and see what had changed from the baseline. So I think there's some real opportunities there from an administrative standpoint. Obviously, from a developer standpoint, the workflow and workflow management, the ability to manage multiple query objects, notebooks possibly, for data science folks, notebooks are kind of the thing. But for T-SQL developers and SQL developers in general, I think being able to see all your query files and organize them according to your Windows folder structure. I know you can do that in SSMS. You can also use the sort of the Visual Studio project organization that's available. That's kind of maybe a 6 on one, half a dozen on the other. I think a big piece for both admins and developers is that it runs on a Mac or it runs on Linux. You can run this on a Raspberry Pi. I'm not sure why you'd want to, but you can. So depending on your environment, I mean, a lot of admins use Mac laptops. And historically, you've had to like SSH in or RDC into a virtual machine running Windows to run SSMS. Well, now you can install this on your Mac laptop and run it natively and connect remotely to your databases without having all that other infrastructure in the way.
Great. And then the execution plan you got there, was that from the Sentry One plugin? Or is that from a different plugin?
I think that's, let's say, do I even have the Sentry One plugin installed at this point? Let's see. Extensions, and let's get rid of that. Sorry, couldn't figure out why. Right now, I just have Profiler, Import, and Azure Data and Sandance installed. Sandance is a visualizer. It's fun. I haven't quite figured out what I can use it for clients for. So I don't have any extension. So this is a built-in feature within the T-SQL kernel, I guess, within the SQL kernel now, that the explain button will bring up the query plan for the query. So I think it's built into the product at this point.
Okay, well, we probably have time here for just one more question, and then are you able to share a parameter value in notebooks between different code boxes?
Yeah, you can create a variable. Let's see. I've forgotten which one. There we go. This one. You can create a variable. For example, let's add a code cell. Table n equals person, and then add another code block. Oh, run that. What? Why is it asking me to log in again? Connected to AdventureWorks. Huh, interesting. Normally, you should be able to do that and then add another code block and say, print table n, like that. I invoked a snippet. Sorry about that. Select star from table n. Does that work? At any rate, I know that in the Python kernel you can create variables and share them. Let me do a quick change of kernel here. Let me just do a new notebook here. Open a notebook. Great book. There we go. Wow, my computer has gone to sleep apparently. That's actually, and it's okay. Let's go up to the connections. Let's just take the connection that I know is working, my local DB, connect, new notebook. I use the Python kernel, and I want to add a code. I can say, a equals 3, run the code. Okay. Apparently, my computer's having some issues with the Python kernel. I'm not quite sure why. Because normally what I would be able to do is add another code block, b equals 2 times a, and just run my cells, and it should run. Okay. But okay, so that would pass. I know that works in. I'm not sure why it's giving me a tilde there. Let's see. That's probably a styling thing. Well, obviously, I'm having some issues with my Python today. One of the things when you install Data Studio, as soon as you open up Notebooks and select either the Python or the PowerShell or any of the Spark kernels, it's going to prompt you for the location of Python on your computer. If you don't have Python installed, it will offer to install their whatever release of Python the Data Studio repository is managing. It's like 3.7 or something like that. Otherwise, if you have your own installation of Python, you've got Anaconda installed or whatever, you can just point to that install and it'll use that kernel from there on out. There is a package manager, and for Python people, that's relevant, and so forth. So there is a little bit more to this than meets the eye. I'm not quite sure why I'm having issues today. I'll figure it out and come back to you. But yes, certainly in Python you can do parameters. I don't see why you wouldn't be able to do in the SQL Notebook. I just haven't tried it.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you, Eric, for presenting today, and thank you everyone for attending. This has been an excellent session. Lots of good feedback in the comments. So thank you everyone for participating.
Thank you all. Appreciate you coming, and try this out. It's free, it's fun to use, and it's really quick. So
all right. Thank you, and everyone have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too, Jason.
Yep, bye.
All right.